I want to get your thoughts, guys, on a new law in California where one particular government area is making it effectively illegal to be homeless. What they've decided is that if you're a homeless person and you've been offered not once but 3 times the options of various accommodation and you decline that offer, then it will be possible for you to be jailed. Pam Foley, who's the Vice Mayor of San Jose, said we can't expect to adequately treat mental illness, addiction or unemployment effectively if someone is living outdoors. Stable shelter, whether through interim housing, safe parking or safe sleeping sites, not only connects people with critical services and job training, but ultimately paves the way towards permanent housing. Now, in this particular district, there are 9,903 known people to be homeless. Of those 9,900 people, about a third of them report psychotic conditions. So a lot of these people, not all, but fully a third of these people are mentally unstable, living on the streets. It's in the interests of the city to clean up these encampments that you can see on your screen, which are not only an eyesore, but as you can imagine, would encourage crime. They're not safe spaces. So it's in the interests of the city, but I would argue it's also in the interests of people to remove them from living on the streets. It might sound inhumane, and Freya, it's been argued it's inhumane to lock people up for being homeless, but if you've got people who repeatedly refuse accommodation, then I think it's inhumane to leave them on the streets, particularly if they're drug affected or beset by some sort of mental illness.
Exactly, and they're calling this the responsibility to shelter. And also keep in mind, they're not going to be arrested if there aren't enough beds available. So they have to have rejected shelter 3 times, and there has to actually be a bed available for them. So I don't see, I think this is a very valid consideration. And I also think the other factor is, I mean, you just can't have these sorts of permanent encampments that are cropping up, not just here, but around the US. And we're seeing it a little bit in Australia. Obviously, we have a genuine housing crisis, and there are many people who simply cannot afford to put a roof over their heads. I'm not talking about those people, but I'm talking about people who choose to live on the streets. And that is quite a common thing. A lot of the homeless people you'll see, especially around Sydney, do have temporary shelter, do have council housing, but choose to be on the streets because they prefer it. They have mental health issues. They don't like their neighbours, a whole range of issues. But is it really the responsibility for every other citizen to have to compromise their safety, put up with this in their streets? I don't think so. It does seem a bit harsh, but I think they're cleaning up the streets and it's good.
Well, I think it's a balancing act. Insofar as if you've got large encampments, there's clearly a problem. I mean, you can't have a public park just turn into a homeless centre, essentially. So you have to do something about that. I understand that. If you have a mental health issue that poses a risk to the public, then you ought to be detained on mental health grounds anyway. It's got nothing to do with whether you're homeless or not. And I think in today's world we tend not to do that because we're too scared to admit that some people have mental health issues that is dangerous to them and other people, and we wait until things go really bad. So I think that's more than just homeless people. There are lots of people with mental health issues that ought to be detained for their own safety. But there are a lot of people who choose to live on the streets and not necessarily in encampments because the other options they have are awful. And my father has worked as a council gardener for most of my life in a capital city and has dealt with homeless people through his whole working life and knows them and talks to them every day because he sees them every day. They live in his park on benches or whatever. Most of them are generally harmless people. And when he says to them, "Why do you live here?" I'll say, well, they come along and they offer me some accommodation in a hostel or some joint, and I go into this hostel, which is full of drug-addled people, and they steal all my property and whatever, so I don't want to be there. I'd much rather, as dumb as it seems, live on a park bench than with a roof over my head because for whatever reason I don't have a lot of money and this is where I've ended up. If you're not causing any danger to anyone and you're not in the way and you sort of pack up your stuff in the day and go about your business, I don't particularly care. leave them alone. If you've got large encampments, I understand the need to move them on. But the mental health aspect is the biggest one. And if they're people who are a danger to society, doesn't matter whether they're homeless, they should be in a funny farm zone.
I agree with you. The mental health aspect is a big one. And if you've walked through a major capital city in this country, I'm thinking particularly Melbourne and Sydney, which I have, even during the day, I'm not just talking about at night, it's shocking the number of people who are clearly mentally unwell, who are doing all sorts of weird things, saying all sorts of, yelling out all sorts of weird things. It's a major problem. And I think if you've got people who have been offered accommodation, I take your point that sometimes you might find accommodation that is just, for whatever reason, you're better off on the street. But if you're offered not one, not two, but three options and you decline all of them, there has to be a point where governments say, you know what, we can't have you on the street.
And the other thing as well, in Australia, I don't know what it's like in the United States, what their system is over there. Have a look at the waiting list for public housing in this country. I mean, the last check I know, in South Australia alone, which has only got 2 million people, they had a 50,000 head wait for public housing. And this is people who obviously, can't afford to buy a place on their own and are desperate for something, and they just can't get hold of it. What a terrible position we find ourselves in.